as I started to panic, I was in the middle of trying to reply to the email stream, but I've got IT guys working on my machine from the corporate side of the fence, and so for the slides, I'm going to have to ask you to show them, Russ.
Oh
In the
yeah, I can
meantime,
do that.
we
Yeah.
we could we could certainly talk about the email first. That would be easy if that helps.
Oh, I have no. Yeah, any way you want to go. I don't. That's fine with me.
Okay, so let's do that first. I read the email and, as I said, started to reply, but got in the middle of an update cycle here that's nuking my ability to finish that. So I completely agree that once we get to the point where we have some intended scoping and deliverable sense. My instinct, though, was that we didn't really have a good understanding of what we could do from multiple perspectives, and so that was the only sort of hesitancy I think I had with respect to establishing a project around that. But I think we're not far from that. That the stuff that's in the slide deck, it attempts to drive this to enough material where we can actually scope out something with confidence that we can have deliverables on that would matter. But that was my only hesitation about the project side of the fence. Am I misinterpreting sort of what a project is about? Should this analytic activity where we're digging into things, asking questions, and having a discussion, is that fit within the scope of a project? That's a question. I
Oh,
don't
it's OCA is new enough that we're still figuring all this stuff out. So one loaded word is the word project. So
Yeah.
lately we're trying to avoid using it, at least unless you put a qualifier in front of it. Because an Oasis open project, OCA is an Oasis open project, along with a bunch of other things of its huge size. So when you say project to Oasis people, they mean actually something different. You actually got to pay to make a new project. Whereas inside OCA, we have what we started out calling projects, but we now call sub projects just to not confuse them with, no, we're not saying to start up a peer of OCA. We're saying to start up a peer of stick shifter.
Right.
And so a sub project used to be the only thing we had. And sometime in the last 6 months or so, somebody said, they're too restrictive. We need to have working groups that are easier to make. And so we're still figuring out the governance rules for working groups, but they're less restrictive than projects. And the only sort of restrictions that really matter are the intellectual property ones. So apparently people want to be able to talk without worrying about, no, actually, I have all this stuff patented. I'm not telling you that. And so in a working group, you can do that. In a project, you can't. In a project, you have to have anything that goes for contributing, anything that's going to go somewhere, or anything even that gets input to a project has to sort of already be allowed to be, the intellectual property rights are understood of it. You may have a patent on it, but you got to say it if you have it.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. But I I don't think. Well, we've tried not to deal with anything exchange that is intellectual property or intended to be controlled in any
Right.
way.
Exactly.
Yeah, but see,
Exactly.
but that is the difference, that a working group, you're not actually that constrained. So that's why I'm picky on, before anything goes out, it needs to be from a project.
Yeah, I got it. And so that creates that filter through which we would be clear about the scope of what was being published and how it should be interpreted. That
Right.
makes complete sense. The second part of the email referred to single packet authentication, and I think that fits into well into a number of technical realizations of the capabilities that should be there to support something like zero trust. I've got no hesitation about that being a compelling part of a zero trust implementation architecture of some sort. But it, I think the market in general has been trying to drive zero trust as a concept and as a set of definitions into sort of direct technical controls in some sense, and that may overshoot the skis. Normally, zero trust policy is only expressed in terms of subjects and objects and their criticality, and that all of the how is that realized and how is it constrained gets mapped into an underlying either reference architecture or implementation architecture of one kind or another. So I don't think there's any hesitation at single packet authentication fitting well into an articulated such architecture.
Good.
The alternatives being considered in other forums right now.
Right, I guess that adds to what you guys have been saying on, based on the discussion again on the on sub project or project. I mean, when I also read these charts, Dennis, you'd laid out there's like 3 steps we can take way before we get to worry about NCCOE, and I figured let's crawl, walk, run. Let's figure out. I still don't, as you said, think we have a scope of what we're trying to get done here. And figured out exactly where we're going to focus ourselves and our efforts on it, and we're still examining that. We're still having conversations, and I mean Dow's going to introduce yet another one, which is fine. So I think we're at the still layer of just trying to survey the landscape like you've been doing, and I think Daryl's going to do, and figure out where we want to add value against all the other known work streams that are related to this area. And I think you have in this chart, you said the first 3 could be done independent of going to NCCOE, and I read that saying, great, we got some time, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out if we're going to go that course based on let's get some work done on the first 3 and some other discussions.
Because Russ, it is important, and I think we should actually get this in our scoping document somewhere.
Yeah,
it's not only we're doing this to contribute to the NIST effort, we're doing this because OCA needs to be zero trust eventually anyway.
Yep, that's correct. That's exactly right. That's right. And we're going to define, how we're going to take that domain of zero trust and apply it to OCA.
Right.
I agree with all that. And that's where I think we're at. I think we're still struggling with that. And, there's actually one discussion I want to have on that on one of your charts, Dennis.
But could you guys then humor me and then somewhere in this text either change it so it doesn't read like we're about to go do that, or that there's a precursor step of being a project first or whatever?
Yeah, we should.
We live by our documentation and we keep putting it out the same way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Can we do that, Dennis? Number 4, I think. 2 things to point out there, and you do have but 1 to 3 above do not depend. That's, I think, kind of the way I read that is let's go, continue with our investigation, right, and continue to do some of those 1 to 3 steps before we do number 4. And then if we do number 4, we should, overtly point out, if we do that, then we got to, deal with the sub project and all the things that are associated with it. And don't go, and then
the
step beyond
all the things that are associated with it are as trivial as at a PGB meeting, we go, okay, it's a sub project.
Yeah. But we should point it out on these charts and say, okay, if we go there and we're going down that path, then let's remind ourselves to do that before we go engage. Does that sound fair?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. And in fact, there may be two projects here. There is nothing that says we need to link tightly to NCCOE. It's just they've done it enough, which we would like to be able to be comparable to, in the sense of being able to say that we've got a similar set of evaluation criteria. And what that does is that opens up the gate for someone to look at the OCA recommendation around an open source founded implementation that provides an alternative to right now what are only going to be SP 1800 documents that are all sort of commercial. There's no open source facility of stuff being evaluated for inclusion in one of those practice guides. So all I was trying to do was to observe that as a potential opportunity for real traction, where people could actually use it, if we can cobble one together in an effective way, could actually use it as a way to begin exploring that as an alternative. Right now, that's not even a glimmer in anyone's eyes. All of the 8 evaluation profiles or commercial components put together in a constellation of stuff to create what might be a zero trust architecture. Although none of them have undergone any evaluation yet. We're at the front end of all of that in the NCCA side of the fence. So.
And it's a great effort, and I'll go so far as to say I highly suspect that once those corporations do put in their inputs, there's going to be open source at least buried underneath the top layer in some of them anyway. So,
that's guaranteed.
So our getting our oar in the water will actually maybe even influence some of the other ones or get interacting with some of the other ones.
In fact, that may be the best utility of the effort that we provide is that it's a clear indication that they need to do it precisely that. And I think with the SBOM effort, what's going to happen is a more transparent acknowledgement of exactly how much open source footprint exists and those
Exactly.
other capabilities. So lots is moving that direction. I think we can take advantage of it and sort of use the normalized vocabulary of how they're talking about defining and evaluating zero trust as a way to accelerate consideration of open source technologies on a more level footing. Right now, all the attention is on evaluating the at least for this sort of hybridized, what can we do now with existing technologies? That whole question is being explored on purely closed source technologies, or at least vendors' view of their technologies. I believe that in some of those, 80% of the components that are being considered have open source as a part of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions we need to deal with this regarding the email?
I'm good.
And Russ,
Okay, so yeah, I'm good. As long as remember the action item to fix the number 4 one. I'm completely good. Yep.
Well, the 4.1, and it's on the other, it's also on slide 7, question 3. Same
Yes, it is.
comment.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yep.
Russ, I'm limited to using my phone right now. Could you jot that observation down on something and email back to me just so I don't forget?
Number 4 on number 7. Got it. Number 7 slides. Got it. Update. Okay. Now, I did have a thought looking. I don't know if you want me to share this now, but I did have a thought looking at your slides, and also, I went to a couple of. I don't know. I forget who hosted them. CSA may have hosted them. Somebody hosted a bunch of zero trust webinars, and I get this consistent ring in my ear on what's going on so far, and I just wanted to throw this by you guys. 2 observations. One is this chart you put together, which I love, right? And this chart, it actually, when I read this, I read pace. No single point of policy enforcement on this thing. So part of me says, we could actually think about, no single point of entry you got down here, right? Multiple sensor types collected and correlated. Doesn't sound like pace.
Well, I think it does in a broad sense. I think the only challenge to it is that this also has things like the XDR stuff in it, and PACE in terms of just posture assessment doesn't quite cover all of what you'd need to do the continuous verification of the other stuff. For instance, with identity, one of the continuous verifications is behavior analysis. And a lot of that may involve AI and a ton of other things that are beyond simple or straightforward posture assessment. The same thing is true about the integrity of the underlying platform. Some of that can involve EDR and NDR feedback that would give you the reason to doubt what you're getting from the underlying posture attestation of the platform integrity. Some of it can get flat out forensic. So all I'm suggesting is that while PACE may be a great place to get a coordinated and maybe converged policy assessment, it needs to get after things that are well beyond posture in order to do that verification that
well, I don't disagree. I just think the boundary of pace could also apply to even behaviors, right? Because your behaviors are captured by multiple points of sensors, right? And then you're going to have some kind of policy that brings your behavior together to figure out how do you want to weigh the behaviors you're getting across the environment that you're getting. So I agree that there's more sensor types and data, but still, don't you think the structure of pace with the ability for single point policy enforcement and the collection and dealing with that collection in a consistent manner, which I think is what pace is part of its fundamentals would be.
So Russ, I'll say yes and no. So first of all, pace is still at crawling of crawl, walk, run, and
yeah, I know.
You put in 900 more posture attributes, and more importantly, you put in really fancy posture evaluation. But the other part of it is there's a boundary. If you use the ISCD model of sensor, sense making, decision making, acting, there's a boundary between sense making and decision making. So the actual running the playbooks, and so PACE is sort of providing the data, but
Yep.
the playbooks are in the decision-making part. They're not in PACE. So you run algorithms to come up with a bunch of stuff. You maybe even do some cross correlation across all these types. But at least in my mind, the SOAR part of what's like, the policy enforcement and stuff like that, some of that's in the playbooks. And the playbooks are, cacao playbooks up in the decision maker and the orchestrator or whatever. So there's some boundaries still to get worked out here.
I agree. I agree, but I think PACE also has to recognize that there is a relationship between the SOAR and the PACE, right? I've seen those
definitely.
flows.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. And again, I just thinking, I'm thinking out loud and saying, and so there's, cacao you talked about. There's also OpenC2, I think, that fits in here.
Yep.
And PACE. I'm just thinking if this work group just focused on the zero trust, attributes and information that we need to pull and ring together and drive policy against. If we spent our time on that, it would add value to all those other projects and bring together, zero trust. Because the other thing I observed in all the videos I've been on zero trust is everybody talks about it in one lens. And I think, Dennis, you even said the NCCOA is just doing identity for now.
Right.
One lens, right? Because it's complicated. There's so much to it.
And again, you got to crawl before you run, and
Yes.
it'll all crawl.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, I agree. I'm just looking at that as, okay, that's an example of the complexity of this. So you do need some kind of, I think of it as some kind of overall technology architecture that's going to deal with the complexity we're talking about and orchestrate this band. That's what I was thinking when I looked at this chart. And then I looked, Dennis, at this chart that you showed is what NCCO is dealing with.
Yeah, no, that's the test environment. You'll note 3 enterprises.
Yes.
There are actually 4 now. This is
Yeah, of course.
standing up multiple. Go ahead.
That one's the easiest one to understand. Hey, Russell, going back to your comment, I think you're talking about the SANS day-long presentation a week or so back.
Yeah.
And just a takeaway, while I've got the floor, is as I was sitting here thinking of an opportunity for an open source project or deliverable or value proposition, each one of those vendors presenting their zero trust architectures, we're really assuming you were buying their whole suite of products, which in some cases might be, possible, feasible, likely, but I would think it's much more likely we're going to have independent best of breed and or just the legacy purchases and investments. Sometimes you may not buy the best technology, but if you invested 3 years in getting it operationally deployed, you're not likely to throw it out for some vendors a Swiss knife, Army knife, zero trust. So I just wanted to highlight that might be a place to look for an opportunity for us to put some overall visualization coordination, I hate using these buzzwords, single pane of glass over silence. I'll go back on mute.
No, I was giving everybody else a chance to speak. I agree. I agree. I mean, it did come across as that's one of the aspects here. So anyway, I just wanted to share my thoughts. I was just looking at this. I've been purposely listening to a lot of zero trust broadcasts that are going on. I just think, that the problem with zero trust is the complexity of these multiple domains. And you point that out here. Not only multiple domains of functions like identity, data, and application access and identity, that kind of stuff, but also all these vendors.
Well, and it's across multiple market segments.
Yes.
There's also competing intentions. You might have noticed the big fight between what's going on with Zscaler and sort of the network policy folks. Zscaler has suggested, even accused, that the whole concept of zero trust is being shanghaied by the network security vendors. What actually has occurred is a recognition that a focus on gateways and identity is just the very first of the most obvious steps toward enabling zero trust, but is in no way adequate to realizing all of the controls that you see in that graph that's on the screen. That is cross-cutting across market segments, it's cross-cutting across Gartner's Magic Quadrants, it's cross-cutting across vendors, so that when you get to that last stage in the zero trust maturity model, you have touched every part of the security portfolio with the intent of limiting supply chain attacks and establishing a level of resilience, but not with the intent of addressing all there is to security. For instance, think about Zero Trust, and it says absolutely nothing about DDoS and absolutely nothing about a number of security disciplines that are still absolutely necessary. So the disentangling of this has been a problem in the market. It's gotten clearer in the discussions that are happening around standardization, but as that has brought in market collaborators, there is by no means one level of interpretation of even the NIST definition, even though its ambition was to drive things to a common understanding. But the evaluation criteria, this grid that you see with the three matrix snapshots, is how they are going to evaluate and compare alternative zero trust solutions to determine, do they deliver the capabilities required to meet the intended objectives. And it's an attempt to drive the ambiguity out. But we're at the front end. Nobody's gone through such an evaluation so far. So there is a lot of level setting going on in the market, and almost none of the technical marketing has actually dialed into what will actually clear the hurdles of the kind of evaluation that you see on the screen. But lots and lots of discussion and debate.
Oh, absolutely. And I expect that's to be expected, as you said, the crawl, walk, run phase here. I think zero trust is. I just think that, looking at the scope of zero trust as you're describing, this is a fairly sophisticated, objective.
Yeah, it is.
And so I'm just trying to figure out if there's, architecture framework, and OCA can help with some of the stuff we're talking about here to enable that, because you're going to have to deal with the problems, the multiple sensors, the single point of entry, the playbooks in order to automate some of this stuff, the network side, the endpoint side, the user side, they're all true.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
And there are very few forums in which that's being considered systemically. What we have instead is folks trying to figure out, for a set of technologies, how do you get there, ignoring the idea of how do I solve the more general problem of connecting things like network detection and response and endpoint detection and response. One talking about NICs and MAC addresses, the other talking about system SIDs and individual devices, which may be multi-homed. Nobody's intentionally grappling with disentangling that, and that needs to happen, but it hasn't yet. And so in that is the architectural challenges.
So I'd like to raise my hand on the additional point that the attack surface that this all creates. I'm trying to build one ring to rule them all. You get one more ring to rule. So the attack surface of all this magical stuff, I think, is not going to be looked at.
Yeah, if this is cobbled together with duct tape and baling wire, you're absolutely right that the integration.
And the timelines are very aggressive.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But the biggest amount of heat's coming out of the Office of Management and Budget memos, that M-Series memo that went out, and the considered FAR contract language. Those are the things with teeth in them around this definitional effort, and both of those have focused on only that crawl phase of establish the 5 capabilities that are foundational, whether it's multi-factor authentication or any of the other 4. It does not mandate in that near-term time frame by 2024, actually having implemented zero trust, just making the headway on laying the foundation for doing so. And the presumptive foundation included multi-factor authentication and a number of other things. I think 5 of them that are mentioned in the memo. But that is only the start of beginning to move forward. Go ahead.
No, this looks dangerously like CDM, like when they were trying to implement CDM, and they have tried, and they thought it would drive a bunch of success around physical assets, securing physical assets through logging, which they ignored the whole software aspect.
Oops.
Right? Is there? Do we have a way to speak into are we trying to influence the people who've written the memo, or?
There are a lot of folks who are doing that, and from 2 fronts. The first is how do they preserve enough of the original idea to actually deliver on improving on supply chain security? Because if this doesn't, we've done a lot of disruption for not much benefit. But on the flip side, there have been a lot of folks who are trying to limit or reduce the amount of market disruption by having a definition, FARs and M-series memos that restrict product procurement for products that may have a tough time actually meeting the bar. So on both fronts, there's a lot of influence being, or a lot of attempted influence being applied at the places where the definitions are meeting policy, and that's meeting sort of investment in some sense. I don't think it's all coherent, and that's a problem. But the stuff that's orbiting around the fairly greenfield, the fairly cloud centric kinds of implementations of zero trust in places where DevSecOps is already integral. Those demonstration efforts have fared pretty well in the initial evaluations. So at least there's some demonstration of efficacy. Applying zero trust to anything but those has been problematic and fraught with all sorts of challenges, and that's part of what NCCOE is grappling with right now. Influencing that is really the place where a difference can be made the most now. Um, I but I think there is a real challenge in also herding the cats and getting this to make sense and getting it to be doable when we're looking at existing technologies.
Is it targeting on? Is it focused primarily on new acquisition strategies for zero trust? Because I mean, not to throw a company under the bus, but when you look at Microsoft or AWS and admin management rules, things like that, it's like, is this going to flow backwards as well as forwards, or do you know?
Yeah, we know that the only zero trust reference architectures from Amazon, Microsoft, Google, or any of the reference architectures that are, including the DoD one, presume that there is an ability to containerize the application that you're trying to secure and at an application level of granularity. More than that, it presumes access to an awful lot of stuff, including that zero trust policy mapper mechanism that's in the yellow box of the Defense Department diagram. So we know a lot about those reference architectures, and they're very biased to cloud-friendly application architecture and cloud-friendly technology. We have no zero trust reference architectures that don't make those presumptions at this point. That's part of what NCCOE is trying to explore. How far can you go without having to presume all of that? And we don't have any of the results of that right now. That's still very formative. They're at the crawl phase of the first working group, or the first two working groups. So I think there's a lot to be thought about there and considered there. Frankly, nobody knows what to do about preserving the zero trust intention in a place where you don't have the ability to have greenfield access to things like the development lifecycle, where you can say what was the level of testedness, what were the provenance of all the parts that make up the components that are participating in a zero trust policy assertion. And because of that, there are still a lot of open questions about what does that mean when it doesn't fit the definition fundamentally in some way.
Yeah, I would think that would be significantly more important because, to your point, if you, I mean, practical living. You and I don't put insurance on my tennis shoes, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a reason why. There's a reason why, from a cost risk standpoint. So if they haven't prioritized or identified how to prioritize the risk, then talking about security is it is cart before horse.
I completely agree.
That's I'm not trying to grill you. I'm just trying to understand where, if we're going to add value and do it in a distinctive way. I think fundamentally, what problems are we trying to solve? What are the relevant symptoms that reflect it? Which are, I don't think any of us has a problem naming all the symptoms, and then aligning those to categories of risk that the business can say that fit into the zero trust framework. I think it has to have relevance back to how does this affect your ability to deliver service. It can't just be IT continuity discussions from you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's just a thought.
Well, there's also an opportunity in some of that, in the discussion we were having before on sort of the pace boundary with the sense making versus the decision making. That business logic you were just discussing, including the risk feeds, is in that, I'll call it orchestration, but it's not at least what people typically think of as orchestration, but it is in that decision making box of IACD that has to, that's what should be driving all the decisions. I mean, even the automated real-time one should be based on, we're going to do action A because action A is reducing the risk to the business more than not doing action A would be.
Yeah. And you'll notice in all the zero trust discussions, very few people are talking about that higher level impact driven risk, which requires asset classification and data classification and all of that stuff, as well as an expression of risk tolerance in a fundamental way. But that those dots have to be connected. There's no doubt that that's not an observable consequence of that controls diagram that we're popping up there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because physical, I mean, it's pretty relatively straightforward. At least maybe I've got this wrong, but from a physical asset standpoint, what's the relevant system the physical asset supporting that the business uses, right? And then subsequently, what's the tolerance for risk, which is really easy. It's like, how long can you go without this? Right? 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days. And I'm just throwing an arbitrary set of numbers out. But if the business can't have that conversation, then the sort of the agreed understanding has to be, well, then you're going to give us a blank check, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think also
I think they're still at the point of, but we know what we're currently doing is creating too high a risk.
But
that's right. Yeah, it can only get better.
I feel like they know they're in a haunted house, but they can't tell whether it's real or not. And you know what I mean? Like they don't know they think they're in a haunted house. They think it's just a show. They don't realize this is not this isn't a movie. It's the real Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so I feel like when I worked with CIOs, this is one of the biggest things I didn't struggle with. I think they struggled with was having a basic conversation back with a business around chargeback, showback. And I would ask them, outside of that, what language does a business speak that you can communicate with them in, relevant to the value you bring?
Right. That they obviously haven't read Hubbard Searson yet. So
right.
And I've been pushing that for 5-6 years now.
Yeah, and
before it was written, but I didn't know it existed. But
yeah, I think that's what, like, if we're bridging a chasm, it can't just, it's not. I know we're not just bridging a technical one, but how do we equip anyone who comes to the OCA and says, "What are you doing of value in this area?" and say, "Okay, here's a framework or model, or a set of principles to go and apply back in to your institution or business or agency or sub-agency." Because you don't make decisions around risk. What you do is protect things that you deem to be of higher importance. And so the people who are prioritizing risk should be making those decisions. And here's what you should be doing to go back and communicate their role in that, their area of responsibility, right?
Yeah, well, and it involves switching from a compliance-based mindset to a risk-based mindset, which is a non-trivial change.
Right.
I've been pushing it for a long time. So.
Right.
No, I like that. I like that. Well, and that sounds like that's exactly right. Moving from compliance to risk sounds like the biggest gap for the business, because from a behavioral perspective, you're spot on. The market doesn't care whether there's disparity or congruity. The market basically redefines its story, meaning vendors redefine their story to complement whatever the buying behavior or the trend is, right? The shiny object. But the complexities that it adds into a business or creates through, the difference between engineering and marketing is significant. And I think it's fed into that whole compliance mindset, check a box, versus actually, like you're saying, quantify risk and prioritize it.
Yeah, I agree. That's interesting, Darryl. One of the things that gets me though about risk is compliance. It's a checklist, as you said, well defined. Risk is not well defined. And so therefore, you know, one of the questions I always have is how do we lay out how you score your risk so it's consistent, kind of like, you know, the UL
But
labs
Russ,
used to do.
it's a known science that businesses, that's the language business speaks. I mean, if you say quant, when you're talking about is a finance guy who gets into
That's
all the
right.
probability and statistics of risk. That's what they do.
Yeah, that's right. He's bridging.
No, I'm talking more. I guess I'm talking more about the sensors that comprise what your risk.
Well, no, but
is.
there are ways to do it. Like I said, Hubbard and Searson wrote the book 6-7 years ago now on how to do
Yeah.
it.
And we were doing chargeback showback with clients 12 or 15 years ago, talking to them about, okay, you have IT service units, you have consumption units. You know what your billable hours are, for instance, in your virtualized environment, your hardware infrastructure for servers. You know what it costs to a unit cost, and you know what unit cost is, power consumption, hardware, wherever it is in its depreciation cycle. The IT finance guy has all of that broken down. I know he does because when I was at Gartner, we had a whole database that goes back like 50 years of key metrics data. I don't know where they got it from, but it goes all the way down to the component level of items that were in a server. And there was a guy in California, an old Italian guy who knew everything. And it was the craziest. Like he wasn't a savant or anything. He just had been around so long. He knew where everything was. If you know what those unit costs are and you're consuming them, then you have a method for showing back utilization and cost, right? And then
Yeah, certainly. But I was more looking at the risk domain, right? Look at this chart: known vulnerability identified required, known payload identity required.
Oh, yeah, I don't even think about vulnerability. That's a good point. I don't even think about vulnerability first. I think about business value. So, what in terms of business process, when an input comes in, a request for a cog comes in, that chain reaction starts the input process for then producing a cog out the other end. The subsequent IT systems that support that whole process have different levels of importance to producing that cog out the other end, which produces revenue, right? Or in the case of the government, a service, a reliable service.
Yeah, no, certainly.
So,
I'm just looking.
I mean, that I agree that vulnerability identification required is wrong because it's even at that level, it's talking vulnerability, not exploit. But it is the equivalent to a maintenance interval in the factory model you were just using. If you throw sand in the gears, after a while, the machine's going to break. You got to do your maintenance before it breaks. Vulnerability is equivalent to that sand. The exploitability is equivalent to the machine breaking. There are analogies that work there, but you have to turn it back into, but what's it mean to the business, not just CE 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Agreed. Oh no, I agree. I just trying to figure out what those elements are because I used to work in application scanning business, right? And we had vulnerabilities every day in applications. We still rolled them out because the vulnerabilities weren't judged significant enough.
And that's why we're in the state we're in today.
Partially, yes. Partially, you can't fix everything.
Well, it didn't used to matter. Now, unfortunately, people die if they don't do it right. Before it was just money. Now it's not.
Yeah, the irony is, I feel like we should be using some natural analogies when we're providing them back to the anybody who consumes it internally. Because I'll give you an example. None of us would go out and buy a car that had the same number of patches being reported, recalls reported to it as Microsoft does. Right.
That's right. That's true.
Well, you might have in 1904 when it was the first car around. It's just you don't anymore because it's evolved and they compete based on it. We haven't got there yet. Software is still pretty new.
It just begs it's like if this system, which is a very known, quantified, historically.
Yeah, but Adobe Flash and Adobe PDF remain the two most exploited things in the world, and we still probably all use them many times a day.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Gentlemen, I got my 3 grandsons all in the same place for the first time in their lives, and I'm going to go break down so I can have dinner with them. You all have yourself a great week.
You too, Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick.
Have a great one.
All right. So given that, Dennis, maybe we should circle around. Where are we? Good discussions.
All page one did was to try to identify three things that I think are things we needed to know the answers to that I can start working on, and have started working on actually. And the time estimate I think it takes me to get to where that's wrapped up enough so we can make a decision about them. Um, the,
Okay.
the
All right.
first was very simple. What's the available open source tech in terms of capability across the security portfolio, at least the spectrum of things that are being referred to in the NCC effort. The second is just about the capability and controls of those representative technologies. So if we can find a match in the technology functionalities, can we find a match in terms of the things that are required to glue them together, and separately to be able to do the mapping into the same way as that evaluation matrix. That's the next slide, into those kinds of mappings in the cybersecurity framework. And then the interoperability is about closing the semantic gap between the parts and the things that they refer to. If you look at different technologies and different magic quadrants in Gartner or in the open source space, they have a view of the problem that they're trying to solve and the identifiers they use to get at them. It's not always clear how to do the integration, for instance, across the networking and endpoint space, or across the analytics space and the individual asset space. As the processing occurs, there's a very specific sense of what are they saying and what are they saying it about, that comes from the tooling, that can have some barriers to real correlation and integration, and then the consequent analysis that gives you actionability or even explainability of the results. And so looking at those as the integration barriers as well helps us to understand what we face there. But there's no deficit to that, in that everyone's facing exactly that question right now.
Well, but we have a higher incentive to solve it. I mean, all said and done, any vendor that gets their way in the NCCOE work sort of gets, embedded in vendor proprietary ways of doing what you just said. Whereas if we could break the boxes apart and make interfaces between them and say, well, yeah, but you can do this one, the third one in, you can do open source, and look, you just got to have standardized interfaces, then you can make it vendor agnostic. And that is an area we could play well in.
And more than that, in doing so, if you maintain some openness to the integration and the ability to correlate, you don't create the walled garden that becomes the artificial boundary for
right, because the value, because all said and done, the value in some of this is going to be the sharing, and if you get the walled garden, you don't get the sharing. So
yeah, true.
I think looking over the first slide among you, and just capturing your reactions to it, we'll do the editing of the suggestions around the items to make sure that a precursor to any engagement with other folks is going to be the formation of a project with a defined scope, so that we have an appropriate way for looking at what are we saying and how it should be interpreted. I don't know the point at which we get there, but we do need to make getting there a target, and so we'll try to make that explicit in the language.
Great.
But past that, I wanted to put that sort of into a broad context of sort of a plan with some timelining around it. So if you see out of the first three something that you can add some insight into, don't hesitate to share it. Russ, maybe think about how we would coordinate so we're not overly casting what we're sharing about how we make progress on those first three items. What's the best? Do we form a more restricted mailing list or something in order to be able to not swamp everyone else with whatever we're collecting in support of those things?
Well, Zero Trust is supposed to get its own mailing list. We agreed to that at the PGB. So it'd sort of be naturally smaller because no one else would know to sign up.
Yeah, that'd be pretty small. That's right. That should fix it once we get our own list. Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah, because there's a lot less people in Zero Trust than there is in the architecture group.
Right, and if they all sign up for it, well, in Tufts they live with the spam.
That's right. That's right. Although we can make the spam, that what we could do, Dennis, is just put stuff out somewhere in the common areas and say, if you're interested, go here for more detail.
Well, that's true too. We should also get our own GitHub repo, but that one's trickier because if we are going to stay a working group, because the GitHub repo will follow, even though it's a working group, if you put stuff in the GitHub repo, you got to do the CLA stuff, which is okay. I mean, it's sort of a way to migrate towards being a sub project.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
do recognize that if we do put stuff on the GitHub repo, we gotta follow the rules because that is one
And
of the.
I also think we asked about, could we use the shared, what were they using for documents? Google Docs. I mean, yeah, that was another possible avenue. So hopefully they can figure that out before we have to choose. And maybe with this group, that would be a better venue than GitHub.
Yeah,
But that's
and it's always better for files to put it somewhere anyway, other than mailing them around. I mean,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's the worst case. All right, so yeah, I'll work with you, Dennis, on it. I'll send you the updated email request.
Oh, that sounds great.
All right, that works good. Is 2 weeks good enough, or do you need more time? Because we usually meet bi-weekly. Is that enough time for you to put the timeline together and lay it out?
No, I think 2 weeks is fine, at least for whatever progress we'll have on it by then. We are coming off of the close of our fiscal year, and a lot of response to the organizational shifts and budget shifts, things people take the opportunity to do at the end of a fiscal year, and so I'm going to have lots of distraction, so it's probably not going to be as fast as I'd like, but also to any extent that you guys see one of those questions you want to provide fodder for, please don't hesitate as well.
And Darryl, will you have something to share the next call on this? You still there, Darryl? He's on mute. I think he was drawing a diagram with the IOB. I think maybe we could look at his business aspect viewpoint. That may be something we could talk about on the next call.
Oh, sorry about that. I was dealing with my son on the other side.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, what were you saying?
We're going to meet in 2 weeks. Will you have something to share in 2 weeks that we can talk about the angle you're looking at?
Yeah, I should have something done this evening for you guys to look at. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, we'll chat about it on the next call. That would be great, because I think you'll bring in the the business aspect that we were talking about.
Yeah, I'll basically show you a framework. It's going to go back to the same thing I told you. The tricky part is, from a government agency standpoint, they don't have a natural output, because they're pure service-based organizations. They're pure civil service-based organizations.
Yep. Yeah.
You can still reduce it all to money, and they do care about money, even if they print it.
That's right.
Yeah,
Oh.
I hope you're right. The current trend in deficit doesn't reflect it, but I hope you're right.
That's hopefully true.
To them, it's just a number. It's just a metric to use for comparison. It's not actual money, but it's
abstract.
It's still a metric.
It is. So let's give it a shot, Darryl.
Yeah, I will.
Okay, guys.
I'll definitely give it a shot. Yeah.
Give it a shot. Can't hurt. Plus, we're going up after more than the government anyway, right? So
That's true.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone, for the good discussion. Dennis, again, thank you for preparing all this discussion and teeing it up. And Duncan, thanks for your interaction. We really appreciate it.
So Dennis,
good work. It's going to be. This is important stuff.
Yeah, it's very challenging. Okay, thanks, everyone. See you in a bit.
Thanks, Russ.
Bye.
Bye, guys.